god, immediately trip, like literally as soon as I press play. Hello, welcome to the video. So today we're trying something a little different. I am going to be standing because if you saw my last video, you saw the struggles of my legs going numb whilst filming, and I really do not want a repeat of that. So today I'm going to be trying to do this while standing, and we're going to see if I'm able to stay even remotely still. Introductions are the hardest part for me, if you can't tell. Today I want to go over the 10-year TBR challenge that I started for myself at the beginning of last year. So last year I made a list of all the books that had been on my Goodreads TBR since 2013, which is the year that I created my Goodreads. I made it a goal to finish all of those books that I had still unread since 2013 before 2023 was over. So in this video, I'm going to be going over those books, letting you know how I felt about them, which ones I read, which ones I did not get around to, and I'm going to talk about the books that I have on my list for 2024. So basically the point of this challenge is to check off all the books that have been on my TBR the longest. I feel lucky that I've had my Goodreads for so long because it makes it really easy for me to look back and see like what books I was interested in reading at the time, what books are still left over. The goal is to check these books off the list before I reach the 10-year point of having not read them. If you want to join along, even if you haven't had your Goodreads for 10 years, which is kind of a ridiculously long amount of time, you can still make a list of the books that you've owned for the longest that you haven't read. You could join in, let me know. I think that'd be really cool. Like, what are the books that you have had on your list for a really long time, and we can maybe like start chipping away at those together. Let's jump into the books that I needed to finish before the end of 2023. So first I'm going to do the books that I did not get around to finishing. The books of shame, if you will. For me, there are only 2 books on this list. The first being Emma by Jane Austen. I did not get around to reading Emma. I think part of it is because this edition is so pretty that I am scared to bring it with me. Like, I don't want to take it with me places. That's the excuse I'll give. I do want to make 2024 the year of reading more Jane Austen, so I'm hoping that I can read this one in 2024. The other one is Les Mis by Victor Hugo, and to be completely honest, I was putting this book off the whole year. Like, every single time I read, I was like, oh, I should read one from my 10-year TBR list. I was like, but not Les Mis, because that one is too big. I'm saving it for last. I saved it for last so much that it never truly happened. I still want to read this. I'm still planning on reading this. It's going back on the bookshelf, and you know, I had said in my last video, or in my original video, that I didn't have a plan for like any punishment or something that was gonna happen if I didn't read them. I'm not being forced to unhaul them. I'm simply just putting them back on my bookshelf and saying maybe it didn't happen this year, but it will happen eventually, because I know that for me, putting a ton of pressure on myself to do anything is not a way that's gonna make it happen. So yes, Emma and Les Mis, those are the 2 ones that unfortunately did not happen, but now I'm going to get into the books that I did read. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. So this book, as I previously said, I've seen the movie like once. I don't have a ton of Alice in Wonderland knowledge, but I actually really liked this one. So I see why this is a lot of people's favorite classics. I found specifically Alice's Adventures in Wonderland to be really enjoyable. I liked the sort of like wordplay. I thought this was, even though this is typically like talked about as a children's classic, I thought it was really enjoyable to read as an adult as well. And I didn't enjoy Through the Looking Glass quite as much. That one, to me, it kind of dragged, and it felt like it was just going on and was a little overly complicated. So I'd say Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is like a 4-star for me, and Through the Looking Glass is like a 2-star. I honestly, the whole time I was reading it, I was like, when is this gonna be over? Originally, I think Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is the only one that was on the list, but this book has both of them, so we did them together. I would absolutely read Alice in Wonderland again. It was good. I'm really glad that I finally read it. I can't believe that it took me so long. All right, so next up is The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick. This one, I had a pretty good idea of what it was about just because I'd seen the movie before, but I wasn't ready for how much like film history trivia sort of tidbits were in this book. I was really surprised by that. I'm not sure how much of it is actually true with like the characters of Georges Méliès and stuff, but it was still really fun to read about. I will say that this is a middle grade book. It feels like a middle grade book. A lot of the time I read middle grade and I'm like, this is for everyone, obviously. I'm a strong, firm believer in the fact that you can read middle grade books at any age, but I will say that the pictures in this are what truly made the story amazing. It feels like you're like looking at the film cell, like the different frames of a film. That's how the storytelling is. It's almost like a slowed down version of like a flip book in a way. Like, you know, the ones where you flip through it and the pictures sort of move. That is a lot of what this book felt like. I think that if the pictures were not there, this story would not be as captivating from the way that it was told. But the pictures are there, and it's just a very cool form of storytelling. I think this is awesome. I would recommend this. Yeah, this one was good. Okay, next up is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I believe I've already talked about this one on this channel. And this is one that I did read front to back, and honestly, I could have done without it. I was hesitant going into it. I don't have the best track record with science fiction, but I wanted to give this a shot. And I can see how, like, as a kid, like, you might be nostalgic for this book, or as an adult, you may have read it as a kid and been nostalgic, but reading it for the first time as an adult, I was not super impressed. Basically, this story is just, like, over and over again, the main character is just like, I'm cool and everyone else sucks. And then that is true multiple times. We go through that multiple times, and then that's kind of it. I also did not like the way that the author wrote about children characters. Specifically, I did not like how you'd be reading, you'd be like, we're going along, we're reading this book, everything's fine. And then you'd be like, and then they put on their clothes. And I was like, so you're telling me that up until this point they were not wearing clothes? I did not like that. I did not like being reminded of that. And I also did not like the author's use of slurs. I think when it comes to this sort of thing, I am sensitive. I don't like reading slurs. I don't like reading people calling each other mean names. It's just something I'm not interested in, and this book did that a lot, and I did not like that. Ultimately, I was not a fan. I'm gonna unhaul this. Literally the only reason why I kept this book is so I could hold it up while making this video. And I'm actually so excited to unhaul a few books after I'm done filming. And then next up after that is Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. I have read Shakespeare before. I'm not a super duper stranger to Shakespeare. This was fine. I honestly don't have that much to say about it because everybody knows this story. Although I will say something I found really funny is that this book feels almost like a commentary on how silly and misguided teenagers are. I'm not an expert in literature. That's not my area. But to me, this feels kind of like Shakespeare poking fun and being like, look at how dumb these teenagers are. You guys, this is so silly. They literally fall in love with each other immediately and are also willing to die over it. Even though Romeo, like, just got over his crush of another girl, like, 2 days ago. So maybe I'm looking into it from the wrong angle, but I thought that was kind of funny, how this book is criticized so often for being like, oh, that's just like another story about people being ridiculous, like, whatever, forbidden love stuff. But it kind of feels like that's the point to me. That was just kind of the vibe that I got. I'm not in a rush to reread this anytime soon, but I'm not upset that I read it. By any means. Next up is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. I read this book in a day. Y'all know I am a fan of short books. So this one is one of those ones where I'm glad that I waited as long as I did to read it. I think I got more out of it as an adult looking back on being a teenager than I would have as a teenager living in that moment. I don't think I would have found it as relatable as I am now, being able to look back. I really like stream of consciousness type stories, and this kind of felt like that to me. although I will say certain parts of it felt like I was reading like one of my own anxiety spirals, and it made me feel like physically anxious while reading. There were a lot of quotes in this that I tabbed, but my all-time favorite quote is when he's talking about like memories from his childhood, and he says, "I also used to call pizza crust pizza bones. I don't know why I'm telling you this." And I think about pizza bones all the time now. That has been living in my mind ever since I read this, and I just think that it's really, really funny. And I also kind of love that out of all of the quotes that are probably more profound from this book, pizza bones is the one that truly stood out to me. That's the perks of being a wallflower. And then I read The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. So originally in my other video, I said I was super here for the garden vibes, and the garden vibes were in fact immaculate. I think that's my main like enjoyment from this book, was just the descriptions of the garden. I loved that. I really did not like the main character. She was really annoying, and I know she's a child, but I didn't like her. And that kind of made it hard to enjoy in some parts. I was just getting tired of reading from her perspective and reading about how like rude she is. It was still worth it. I'm glad I read this. It had been on my list for so long, I needed to. And I really like the illustrations in this book. They're really pretty. There's some above each page. There's one of like a little bird. But yeah, like, I'm glad I have this. I'm glad I have a copy to keep on my shelves. I think I've said before that the book Mandy by Julie Andrews Edwards, in my opinion, that book is like the superior version of The Secret Garden. And upon reading The Secret Garden, that just like cemented that into my thoughts even more. It's fine. I liked it enough. All right, and then we have A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This book is honestly one of my proudest accomplishments of 2023. I'm just so happy that I read this book. I was so intimidated by it. I was so intimidated by starting my first Charles Dickens book. And I was honestly kind of worried that this was like not the best place to start. I mean, as you can see, there are a ton of tabs in this book. I had such a good time reading this. It felt like a true journey. And by the end, I was literally like pumping my fist, like reading about what was happening, like, yeah! I read this mostly physically and also a little bit on audio. I found that it helped me get in the zone to listen to someone reading it out loud while I was also reading it, and I put it on like 1.75 times speed so it could kind of like keep up with the pace, and that actually helped me a lot. And I think I'm gonna probably do that again for when I finally get around to reading Les Mis. I sort of joked about like part of the reason why I enjoyed this book so much being because of Stockholm Syndrome, because I was reading it for so long. Once I got past the first couple chapters and made it to like part 2, once I sort of got used to Dickens' writing style, I feel like I got so invested and I was looking forward to picking this up. It just makes me feel really excited when I read a book I'm really intimidated by and I come away from it being like so glad that I read it. It makes me just really, really happy. Yeah, also this kind of like fits the vibe of my outfit really well. Just saying. This was like 5 stars for me. I really, really loved this book. I'm excited to read more by Charles Dickens, and honestly talking about it is making me feel like so excited just to like read more books in general. And then I read The Giver by Lois Lowry. This was one of the first ones that I read last year as part of this challenge, and I loved this book. I read it in a day. I read it so long ago that I honestly can't really remember that many details about it, but I remember that I really, really loved it, and I was just really happy to have finally gotten around to it, because again, this is one that like not just for the past 10 years, but like since I was like 8 years old, I've been wanting to read this book. I don't think I'm gonna continue with the series. I don't know. I'm fine with it leaving off where it did. I'm a big fan of the ambiguous sort of endings. I have no problem just leaving it where it is. And yeah, good soup. Good soup. All right. Next is Wildwood by Colin Malloy. This is the only book out of the bunch that I DNF'd, and that is because I don't know who this book was written for. So this is said to be a middle grade book. It takes place in Portland, Oregon, which is initially what drew me to it. Also, just like the beautiful illustrations. It's so pretty. It's so pretty, and I wanted to love it because I love having it on my shelf. Like, it's beautiful, But honestly, I was so bored when I was reading this. I made it to probably like, I don't know, I want to say like around page 200 before I called it quits, because I just could not bring myself to pick it up. This book switches perspective between two characters, the main character Prue and her friend Curtis, and I just did not care about Curtis at all. Like, I'm sorry, but I did not want to read from Curtis's perspective. I wanted to read about Prue rescuing her baby brother, and I did not give a hoot about Curtis and the like battles of whatever. Also, there's some weird amount of violence in this book that really made me question if it was for children. It kind of felt like the author was trying to give it a similar vibe of like, I don't know, like children's classics can tend to be a little more gruesome or just like, I don't know, grisly, I guess? Like they don't exactly fit the expectation of what modern day children's books are like, and this sort of felt like it was trying to replicate that vibe, but I don't know that it succeeded. I wasn't into this one, and I'm so disappointed because I really wanted to be into this one. I'm probably never gonna finish this. It is just too long. It is almost 600 pages, and I'm glad that I'm not afraid of DNFing books anymore, because once upon a time I would have forced myself to slog through this, and I don't want to. And so I won't. And that is that. I think that if this had just followed Prue and had had less battles and random songs in it, then I would have probably liked it more. The end. Alright, and then the last book from this challenge, the one that I most recently finished, was Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. And this is the one that I think surprised me the most, because I was not really expecting to enjoy this book. You know, I went into it sort of begrudgingly. I was like, okay, I have to read it. Like, it was between this, Emma, or Les Mis, and somehow I wound up reading this one. I was like, I got one room for like one more before the end of the year. And I actually really enjoyed it a lot. Also partially listened to the audiobook with this one. I listened to it while I was crocheting. It was a really good book to listen to sort of while I was doing something else, and Elizabeth Gilbert reads it herself, which is cool. I'm not typically an audiobooks person, so I'm glad that this worked out for me. But I enjoyed it. I think like, upon reading people's critiques, a lot of the critiques seem to be that people don't realize that this is a memoir. A lot of people are like, the main character of this is very self-involved and talks about herself a lot, and she's not a very enjoyable main character. And I think that's kind of funny because it's not a character, this is just her writing her story. It makes sense that it maybe might not work for some people from a fiction standpoint, because this is not fiction. But yeah, it is a #1 bestseller for a reason. It's because it's quite accessible, it's fun to read from. Some of the language is a little outdated because I think this was published in like 2001. And yeah, honestly, I liked it. Elizabeth Gilbert is kind of a huge dork. Like, it's one of my favorite things about this book is I was expecting it to be pretentious, and it's not really pretentious. She's very self-aware. She's, again, like kind of a dork, and I actually really enjoyed reading her story. Alright, so those are all of the books that I had on my list that I needed to finish before 2023 was over. And now I'm gonna go over some of the books I'd like to finish before 2024 is over. So these are books that I added to my TBR on Goodreads in 2014. I believe 2014 is when I first read Wuthering Heights, which is still one of my all-time favorite classics, and also when I read The Great Gatsby. So I was sort of starting to immerse myself more in classic literature. There's less on this list than last year, but we got some big ones. #1 is gonna be White Fang by Jack London. I think I was 11 when I got this book, almost 16 years ago. Gifted to me by my grandfather. I believe this is a book about a wolf, and I'm pretty sure he is trying to survive and also learn to trust human beings? I'm not entirely sure. I just know that the protagonist is a wolf, I think. I typically do not do well with animals dying and animal cruelty, so if the wolf dies, I will be crying. Okay, next up is another big one, The Entire Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. In 2014, I put the entire giant volume of all of the Chronicles of Narnia on my list of books I wanted to read. So I guess technically this is like 7 or 6 books in one. So I guess because of that, it's not necessarily that there's less books on the list. It's just that a lot of them are condensed into this one volume. And I'm gonna need y'all to hype me up for this because I haven't been reading a ton of fantasy the last couple years. I've been reading a lot of like standalone books, shorter books. Reading a massive fantasy series isn't something that I've done for a very long time. I am kind of excited to read this because I see a lot of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis memes on Pinterest about their friendship and dynamic, and I am a big Tolkien fan. If only to have more context for the memes, I think I will have a good time reading this. I am intimidated, but I think if I sort of chip away at it one at a time, this will not be too bad. Let me know if you've read these and if you like them. Let me know which one your favorite is. Should I watch the movies? Because now a major motion picture, after all. All right, and then I've got another Jane Austen, Sense and Sensibility. I thought that I had read this, but I have no memory of it. There is a very small chance that this is a reread. And I never marked it off on my Goodreads, which seems rare because I am usually quite meticulous about my Goodreads. This is another one of those really, really pretty penguin cloth-bound classics. I think I'm going to try to read both of these this year and just make it a Jane Austen year. I know that I like Jane Austen. Again, I've read Pride and Prejudice. I don't know why I'm reluctant to read these. If you've read Jane Austen, I want to know what your favorite one is. I'm gonna read both of these. So, oh my god. Lastly, we have The Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. This is not a short book, but it is so pretty. Like, look at this. It's so cool. I have read some of these individually for classes and such. This has quite a few poems at the beginning, and then the rest are all stories. This is the edition that I logged on my Goodreads in 2014. I think I actually bought this in 2014 from Barnes & Noble. And yeah, again, like, I think this is the sort of thing where I can kind of chip at it throughout the year. Yeah, some of these stories are pretty short. So even though there's a lot of them, I don't think it will be the worst. And also, I will say that the print is not super tiny. Here we have it. Edgar Allan Poe. Oh, that sounds so good. And just for the heck of it, I think I'm gonna throw Les Mis onto my 2024 list as well. I just want to read it. Like, I do. After talking about A Tale of Two Cities, it made me feel like maybe I can actually get this done. That's that. Those are all the books. Oh no, wait, actually, there's one more. Sorry about that. We have one more, and that is Liar, Temptress, Soldier Spy by Karen Abbott, I want to say. I'll put it up here because I don't actually own this one physically. I think I'm gonna get this one from the library. This is a story about 4 women who go undercover in the Civil War. I think it's one of those books that's like, it's a nonfiction, but it's sort of sensationalized, if that's the correct word. So I don't think it's like 100% nonfiction, but a little bit like spiced up a little. If I can recall, we learned about the Civil War during my history class in 2014, so that is probably why this one made it to this list. And that's the last one, officially. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. I'm excited for another challenge. I'm intimidated, but honestly, it's probably about the same as last year. It's just that it seems scarier because the books are bigger. And it is one of my reading goals this year to focus less on reading more books and focus more on just reading books that I truly want to read and reading a few bigger books. I want to get past my fear of big books, get past my fear of reading series. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it this far, I really, really appreciate it. Thank you all for being here with me. It genuinely means so much. Let me know in the comments like what books have been on your TBR the longest. Let me know if there's any books you absolutely want to finish before the end of this year. Let me know your opinions on any of the books that I mentioned also. I'd love to hear if you enjoyed them. Yeah, so again, thank you so much. Good to see you again, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget to like the video, hit that subscribe if you're feeling funky fresh, and yeah, thank you so much. Bye.